And we're live.
So welcome to the October meeting of the WebRTC Working Group. A few notes. We have a new chair. Welcome Guido Urdaneta, stepping in for Harold Albestron, who's served us extremely well for over a decade and will still be participating. So welcome, Guido. Next slide. So we're going to try to cover a lot of things today. So we're going to have to be particularly hardcore about time. But we're dealing with a lot of things that fell off the TPAC agenda because of our power failure, plus a few new items. Next slide. Okay, the slides are up on the wiki. We do have to get a note taker. Do we have a volunteer? There's always this awkward pause until we get somebody. And the meeting's short on time, so probably better for someone to volunteer than.
Since Jan-Ivar is running the slides, I can volunteer to take the notes.
Thank you very, very much, Harold. Okay, great.
Just a moment.
And the meeting, just to note, the meeting's being recorded and the recording will be public. Next. Just a reminder about the IPR policy, which we abide by the W3C patent policy at the link there. And only people and companies listed on the link are allowed to make substantive contributions. Next. It's also the W3C Code of Conduct. We operate under it. Please keep conversations cordial and professional. Next. I think you all know how to operate the meeting by now. Just raise your hand to get into the queue and lower it to get out. And turn on your microphone when you speak, because we'll hear you better that way. Next. Okay, I think as you all know, just because something's in the repo doesn't mean it's been adopted. Next. Okay, so here's the agenda. We're going to talk about codec issues and then interop and code complexity, ICE transport, RTP transport, and the zoom level on captured tabs. So why don't we turn it over to Harold and Hendrik to get started.
Yeah. That would be me. So next slide. You can go to the next slide again. There's two issues here. I've only addressed the first one, but I think the second one is just a bug fix. So we had a lot of issues, as you can see, relating to codecs. And at TPAC, we made a decision about how to deal with unidirectional codecs and transceivers. And my understanding that like most of these issues were in some way or another related to the same question. And now we have a decision. So I went ahead and created a new issue and closed all the other issues. But if you filed an issue and felt like I closed it when I shouldn't have, then please reopen it. But I think it's good to address, do this proposal A before we revisit. And so in short, proposal A is send only transceivers, the send only codecs, receive only this receive only codecs, and send receive transceivers, the send receive codecs. Sounds intuitive. Next slide. So I went through a laundry list. The goal of this issue is do proposal A, and I looked through the things, and the thing we need to change is that when you call set codec preferences, it only looks at the receive codecs. If you put in a send only codec, it will throw an exception. So that's the main thing we have to change. And fun fact, the spec used to say this, but we did an amendment where we tweaked this such that it throws if you put in a send only codec. So let's just revisit that. And we're done, except we're not. Next slide. So if you can set both send and receive codecs as a preference, the next thing that happens is when you negotiate, you will apply this filter. So if the transceiver is send only, you'll only include the send only codecs. If it's receive only, you'll only receive only the receive only codec, and so on. So there's one thing that we haven't addressed in the spec. And that is what happens if you apply this filter. Let's say you do set codec preferences and you have a send only codec, and then you set the transceiver direction to receive only. this filtering will result in an empty list. Now, if you use set codec preference and you specify an empty list, that means I have no preference, give me all the codecs that are applicable. But if you explicitly say, I want a send-only codec, and then your direction does this filter and you end up with an empty list, what happens? We don't specify. So next slide. So here's 3 proposals for how to deal with this sort of error case. Proposal A is the least footy-gunny. It says, well, if the filtering results in no preference, we treat that as you don't have a preference. So we just do an offer answer as if you didn't have a preference. So that won't fail, but you won't get that send-only codec on your receive-only transceiver. Proposal B is to try to throw an exception as soon as possible to warn the app. So if you do set codec preference and direction doesn't match, we'll throw an exception. Avoids the problem, but then if you want to change direction, you'd also have to do some sort of reset dance where you remember to call set codec preference, clear the preference, change direction, and then set codec preference again. Might be a bit cumbersome. And the proposal C is, I think, the most foot gun or foot bomb in this smiley, which is that, well, if the filtering results in no codecs, we actually negotiate no codecs, which means we reject transceiver and stop it. Those are the 3 options as I see it. I prefer proposal A. It seems friendly, but I'm willing to hear other arguments. Opinions?
Can anyone think of anything bad that would happen with proposal A?
It would it would end up in anywhere.
No, Harald, go ahead.
No, it would end up in a state where you might be surprised by the codec you end up using. But is that important?
Yeah, I'm also torn. I don't have a strong opinion. So just that, it's called set codec preferences, not set codec requirements. So by that, I can reserve a table at a restaurant, but if I don't show up, I might still get a table, but I'll have to wait. Yeah. But the language in JSF is perhaps a bit stronger than set codec preferences might suggest. And early failure is supposed to be good, but in this case, I don't think I care enough. The proposal A seems fine to me.
And even if it's unexpected, it would probably be even more unexpected if your transceiver just stopped when you negotiate. So
I vote for not. I vote for working.
Okay. All right.
I kind of disagree with your foot gun placement. I think A is more of a foot gun than B, because if you expect some preferences, you don't expect to have no preferences after changing something that seems unrelated. So to me, proposal B is a little bit better. Failing early, and if you have to do some reset preference dance, might as well do it, but it's how often are you changing the direction of a transceiver in general? If it's not an operation that happens often enough, then we might just say, hey, it's better to just set your direction and then set your preferences, and people will do that, and it's not going to be a problem.
Well, fair enough, but I think there are some surprises. For example, there are, you can change the direction with direction equals foo, but you can also do remove track. And I think a lot of applications, they just create the transceiver, they don't specify the direction, which means it's send receive by default. And then you do, if you do remove track, it becomes receive only. Now, would that be a problem? I guess if you're going from, Pierre?
So I'm just reading the spec as currently written to refresh my memory, and it says the set codec preferences method overrides the default receive codec preferences. used by the
Yeah,
user.
that's actually part of the my laundry list of things to do. It's a normative description, and we should update that description to include the other use cases. But in terms of algorithms, it's this throwing that's the problem.
Well, I was just wondering, like, are you suggesting set codec preferences would also change the send codec preferences? Is that what you're suggesting? Or
Yes, to refresh the memory. So if if you have a send only transceiver, you offer, then you can have your preferences. If the answer doesn't have any preference, they will just use whatever you used by default. Anyway, this is sort of revisiting what we decided on
okay.
TPAC. So
All right, I'm sorry.
let's not revisit that, hopefully.
I'm just trying to understand, if I'm a user and I call set codec preferences and the language says receive codec preferences, but then I also change the direction to something that's send only, I would kind of expect that the set codec preferences would have no effect anymore. But maybe I'm missing something. I don't want to dig up what we just decided at TPAC. Sorry.
It can be confusing, hence 10 issues that I all closed. Johnny Mac?
Well, so I think it's important that we do make decisions based on understanding, though. So the issue with set codec preferences, as I understand it, is that you offer, it's primarily asterisk about what you want to receive. But there's an edge case when you have send, receive, or send, where you're offering, here's what I can receive, and the answer gets to override that. And as part of complete negotiation, you all agree on what to send and receive, but there's a limitation, which is easiest to see with send-only transceivers, in that you're kind of, it doesn't make sense to specify what you want to receive in that case. So there's JZip allows you to then, or it says you should then specify your send codecs, and it follows the same negotiation because that's the only thing you're negotiating effectively. But it has, I would say JZip has the same negotiation path in all cases. But what it does not do is directly control what you're sending, because it's not instead of the negotiation. What you're sending is still subject to negotiation. So the other side, if the other side has strong preference, it would override your setting. So the only thing I think we should be, the only thing that was simpler when we had the receive only language is that there was less, web developers would be less confused if you only talk about the reception. It's easier to explain that this is not directly controlling what you're sending, but it's an input to negotiation, so it can end up affecting what you end up sending. But it's not I want to send X, therefore I set preferences to send X only, and that's what's going to fail if this is a send only codec. So we might need some language to clarify that it's not a direct setter, but it's an input to negotiation. But yes, so to Florian's point, I think failing early, if we can throw an exception in set codec preferences, that might seem better. I am worried though that since browsers implementations tend to implement different codecs at different times, this can create situations where the footgun or the gotcha is more like, I tested on browser A and it seemed to work fine. Why is it failing on browser B? And I don't handle that. So you could argue failing early might be good, but from an interrupt making calls work kind of thing, being able to use the most bleeding edge codec, hopefully it seems more reasonable to fall back to a lesser stellar codec than to have no codec at all. So I think I would still prefer A.
Kim?
Yeah, I prefer A. I think it's better to have something happen. And I think this is a rare enough edge case that if anybody actually cares, they're going to have to dig into why it didn't do what they thought. And I think it's better that it kind of basically works, but they get the wrong codec, and then they have to figure it out. Maybe to pick up Yanivar's point, maybe there is somewhere where we need some language to explain, help them look for what it is that they've done in this, what I think is a very, very rare problem. And maybe I'm wrong, maybe it happens all the time, but I feel like it's pretty rare.
Right.
I think it's going to be pretty rare, and we're talking about things that may not even happen much to users. But A will be a silent error, B will be an explicit error that will throw an exception, and then users will know about it. And the only problem with B is that they need to be able to know that there could be exceptions, and they need to block them or do something about it. Otherwise, their application may break. And it's just up to us to decide whether we prefer a silent error or an error. And when we have an error, well, people need to be able to handle them in any case.
In proposal A, it's silent error, right?
Yeah, proposal A is no error, but you
Or no
didn't
error.
get the codec you expected.
So just
Because
coming
it's
back
fast.
to that, if you caught the exception, would you be able to fix it without round tripping an offer answer? And I think the answer is you can't.
No.
So you're adding latency to the user experience just because you think it's more likely to be informative for the developer. So it feels like the wrong answer to me.
And historically, these APIs have never thrown an exception, so I don't think web developers do try catch around these.
Set codec preferences will.
But only if you use it incorrectly, right? Like, well, I
Just
guess
like any
also using
function.
it incorrectly. Yeah.
Yeah, so B wouldn't require negotiation, but C does. Well, they would both require negotiation, but proposal B throws ahead of negotiation. Right.
And C
Well,
just rejects.
that's
doesn't
not
throw.
always true.
It just stops your transceiver.
Actually, if you're the answerer, then you often might call set codec preferences and have remote offer, and then you're kind of screwed.
So I'm hearing opinions. I'm not hearing strong opinions. Do we have enough for rough consensus? Do we? Oh. So I still prefer proposal A, but again, I don't have a super strong opinion. I've heard more support for proposal A than proposal B. Does anyone want to change their mind? Should we put it to a vote?
I proposed B, but I'm not strictly opposed to A either. I'm just saying that I prefer it, but it's not as strong. So I think anything may work.
Harold?
My reading is that we should continue forward with proposal A. It's a strong enough tendency that we have a rough consensus, and no reason to block on this. If users don't like it, we can revisit, but let's go forward.
All right. Sounds like
All right.
a plan.
Yeah, let's proceed with that, and then I can also check with some other Mozilla folks to double check that we're okay with A, and move from there.
Yeah, please add that to the notes.
And we can make sure we have the right notes also describing that type of scenario in the specification to warn people about issues if they do things in the wrong order.
Sounds good. We're moving on.
Okay, are we done with this item? Yeah.
Okay, so I gave away 10 minutes of my slot to another topic, so I'm very happy to be a little bit early. So next. So just motivation. This isn't a fully fledged proposal. This is a proposal for a proposal. Sorry about that. So a lot of times we have discussed scenarios where people want to feed through things through web codecs for whatever reason, and then send the results over WebRTC, or receive and decode with web codecs. So that's one of the reasons, is that web codecs has more ability to change configurations on the fly than WebRTC. Another code is that they can make per frame decisions. But anyway, people want to do this. Next slide. And by the way, did someone type into the IRC room while I'm talking? So on the left-hand side is the RTC encoded video frame metadata and the encoded video frame IDL. As you can see, it's pretty long and has a lot of attributes. The right-hand side is the encoded video chunk. So you can see it's a little bit different. And next slide. It's not possible to merge this. Just there's no way to make a single object that will work satisfactorily for users of both APIs. But mapping them is. I mean, we have different models for data access. Data is an attribute in the RTC encoded, and there's a function that allows you to copy out the data in the web codecs. Configuration info is different. Basics as MIME type and frame size. These are things that you set when you configure the codec in web codecs. And so it's not unknown to the application, but it's not per frame data. There's a bunch of RTP level data that we shouldn't need to set when we create encoded frames from web codecs frames or chunks, because that's set by the packetizer when you send the frame, and not when you create the frame. So next slide. So I propose that we add an API shape, which is probably going to be going into both the web codec spec and the WebRTC spec, which is that we have a constructor for encoded video chunk that takes an RTC encoded video frame. Everything that is in the encoded video chunk is also in the RTC encoded video frame, so that should be okay. In the other direction, we should have a constructor for RTC encoded video frame that takes the encoded video chunk and some metadata, because the application will know what metadata is because it used it to configure the codec, but the frame doesn't. So with those two functions, we should be able to interoperate between the two. And if we take a little care, we can probably avoid copying the data. But that's the outline of what I'd like to do, and trying to get this off my chest and into code. So let's take 5 minutes to discuss whether it's worthwhile actually making pull requests for this and trying to define how they work. Floor's open. Wow, Bernard, you're at the top of my list.
Yeah. So can we go back 2 slides or just to look at the web IDL? Yeah, I want to say, first of all, I think this would be a very useful thing to have. But wanted to ask about a few things. The encoded video chunk has duration, which at least for audio is essentially the P time. So I guess you could consider that like an RTP parameter. And I guess the other RTP parameters would be synchronization source, payload type, contributing sources, and RTP timestamp, right? Roughly. So is the duration one of those things that would be set automatically? Say if you're constructing an encoded video chunk from the RTC encoded video frame metadata?
I was confused about the meaning of duration. I read through the web codec spec and tried to find out what it means.
Yeah,
But
it's a little bit confusing, Harold.
Yeah.
But for audio, what it essentially is essentially the P time.
So my reading of it was that it was either the duration between the intended presentation time of the previous frame and this one, or the duration between the previous and the next one, between this one and the next one.
Right.
So if
right.
you're saying that it's the length of the audio buffer for audio, then it's the elapsed time between this one and the next one, which would in RTC frame time say that it should control what the next timestamp should be.
Yeah.
Which seems a bit odd.
Yeah, it's some of the definitions are not good. We talked about timestamp as well, which can mean different things in the encoded video chunk. But anyway, I think you're going to have to deal with some of that confusion. But anyway, it would be a useful thing to have. I guess the other thing that came to mind was frame ID and dependencies. Like if I was constructing the RTC encoded video frame metadata from the encoded video chunk, I don't have those two things. So I guess I had a question about how I would come up with the frame ID. I guess I would increment or something.
Yeah. I mean, that's a concept that exists only on the RTP side, so I think you just have to increment it. Dependencies have to be set according to the dependency chain that you use to configure the encoder.
Right.
So that's a complex translation, I think.
Yeah, in the new encoder API that Eric has proposed, it would be more clear.
Yes.
But we should just, although it's the dependencies are the references, not quite dependencies. Anyway, I would definitely be in favor of you trying to do a PR. There'll be a lot of questions that'll come up, but I think it would be very useful. Thank you.
When?
Ewan?
Yes, so I totally agree with the idea that the encoded source proposal should work very well with web codecs. So you get encoded video chunk, and it should be both easy and efficient to pass the data directly to the encoded source and to the RTP pipeline. So I think this exercise really needs to be done when designing the encoded source proposal. Whether we should use RTC encoded video frame as the base object to feed encoded source, that's what we basically said in the GitHub issue. But I don't think that we need to discuss that, because certainly the encoder has information, but it does not have all information, like all the RTP fields. Basically, some are useless. So should we allow to set some of these while they're not useful? So maybe it should be just an encoded video chunk plus a different dictionary or something like that. I'm not really sure. On decoding side, currently we have no proposal. So for going easily from encoded video frame to encoded video chunk to pass it to web decoder, it's a P2 to me. We might want to leave it to when we are actually tackling the decoded source proposal. But certainly this is great to start the discussion here, because it's really needed to converge on the encoded source proposal.
All right, thanks. I think I was next on the queue, but Google Meet dropped me because I spoke the next person's name. So if that's okay, Tim, I can go now. So I also agree that we need to solve the interoperability here. I'm a little nervous because encoded video chunk is immutable, whereas the RTC encoded video frame is not. It's actually mutable. So I don't know. I'm not sure. I think it's a good exercise to try to do this, but I'm not sure it can be done without a copy. So this might be a case where 2 is too many. And the spec always mentioned that the goal was to move to the web codecs interface. So I would also like us to keep open the idea that maybe we deprecate one of them. And by that, I mean looking at where RTC encoded video frame is used today, like in WebRTC transform, and see if we can provide an option there to switch the transform so that you can opt into using web codecs versions instead. And that if that approach can save us a copy, that might be worth exploring. But otherwise, I'm open to try anything that works here.
Yeah, so my thinking that didn't make it into the slides is that constructing an RTC encoded video frame from an encoded video chunk should probably destroy the video chunk, encoded video chunk.
Do a transfer, yeah.
And vice versa.
Yeah, that might work. Tim?
I'd actually come off the queue. All I was going to say is I'm assuming this can't be done as a polyfill, but it became clear from the conversation that it can't.
Okay. Bernard? Oh, okay.
I was just going to ask if we're also going to do audio as well as video.
Yes, I didn't have room on the slides for both.
And also, yeah, all right. I also had a question. Do we feel like encoded video chunk has all the same information? Like if I convert back and forth, is it lossy?
Yes.
Yes, guess what?
And when you convert from an RTC encoded video frame to an encoded video chunk, you have to save the metadata data elsewhere if you want to preserve it. So the conversion from RTC encoded video frame to encoded video chunk is lossy. It loses metadata. I don't think there's anything except possibly duration that is lost in the other direction.
Well, I guess I'm not hearing anyone opposed to exploring this difficult problem. But Ewan, were you suggesting an alternative to the constructor approach?
Yeah, I think that pooling encoded source with RTC encoded video frame, that's one option, but we should also look at another option, which is, for instance, to pass an encoded video chunk to it, plus some additional metadata, like a dictionary that is separate, for instance. That's another option, so that we would be very
Sorry, I didn't catch you. Passing that to what?
To the encoded source sync. So you get the encoded video chunk from the encoder, and then you want to send it to the RTC pipeline. And so we could write the encoded video chunk plus some metadata, and we would control exactly which metadata we would expose there, because some of the metadata or the data in RTC encoded video frame does not really make sense here. Basically, some would be not used, ignore. So I'm not sure it's great, and we might want to extend what we pass to the RTP pipeline, and which should not be useful in the case of WebRTC encoded transform. So maybe we should untie these two issues and not try to reuse too much of RTC encoded video frame in the encoded source. I'm not saying that we should do it, but I think we should consider it and discuss it on GitHub.
Yep. Okay, considering.
Yeah, I raised my hand also.
Right.
Yeah, I have a question. What happens if, in one direction, it's kind of obvious that if we add anything in the video frame metadata, we can, there's no problem at all, and it's just a new field that can be filled. But on the other direction, what happens if there's a new field added in the video chunk? Will it be a problem in the future when converting it into an RTC encoded video frame in any way, because we might be losing some information or anything like that. How stable do we think the video chunk interface is?
I think that's a generic question whenever we have specs that refer to each other. I mean, obviously, if we add more fields to encoded video chunk, then the constructor for WebRTC encoded video frame metadata will have to be updated to say how it handles these fields.
Right. So we don't think that's a concern.
That's another good point where
yeah, we'll address it when it comes. Sure, that's fine.
That's another good point about passing the unencoded video chunk plus some RTP specific metadata as a separate dictionary, for instance.
Okay,
Yeah, just a last point about, we also need to figure out how to divide this task with the media working group. If they're okay with us owning the initial solution or initial proposal. So,
my thinking as a member of both is that I'll just make the half the proposal in each group and saying that okay, each group has to own its own half of the proposal. Double the trouble. Okay, then we have end of discussion. Let's go on. So I think it's Eric's turn.
Should be.
Chair. Take control.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Next slide. Yeah, Niva, you're in control of the slides. Ooh. Niva. Yep, there we go.
Yep. Right. There. Let's go. Next slide, please. Yes, next slide, please.
I think you have to shout louder.
Next slide, please.
I can take over if he dropped off. Let's see. Which slide?
Right.
Here we go. Shout again. Okay.
There we go. Okay. Yeah, so this proposal is about adding the encoder complexity control to WebRTC, otherwise known as speed setting or otherwise known as effort level. So basically the trade-off between CPU usage and compression efficiency. So the idea is to have just high level, low, normal, and high preference. And this will be executed at a sort of best effort level, because some encoders don't implement this feature, and they all have sort of different numbers of settings. So the implementation will have to map this preference to an actual speed setting under the hood. Yeah, and the default would be normal essentially, and then you can decide if you want to use a higher complexity to get higher quality at the cost of CPU, or the other way around. So next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Sorry, I'm here. I'm just not used to being in control. There you go.
All right. I mean, so the question then is why not just let the browser set this automatically? And the idea is that the application can have better knowledge of when this trade-off makes sense or not. So if you think that reducing bandwidth is more important than CPU usage, you can do that change. Or vice versa, if you know that this thing is deployed on a machine that is plugged into power and it has a good fan, you don't really care about CPU usage, you just want the highest possible quality. or you know it's a device that has in the past thermal throttled, and you want to avoid getting into that mode, you can go in the other direction. So yes, this is basically all of the proposal we have. Thoughts, opinions?
Bernard is first.
Yeah, just had some questions. I assume this is primarily for video. I guess it maybe would influence Opus, but not other audio codecs. Is that right?
That's a good point. I had only thought about it for video as well. Yeah, you know audio, you know. What encoder complexity settings for audio codecs? Do those exist? Would they make sense to?
For Opus, it does, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think you'd have to kind of map out how it would map to Opus. Yeah, otherwise, I think this is a useful thing to have. Although, you know, for the use cases, you'd have to think through how you might get some of the information, like whether you're in thermal throttling or not. I don't know that we can get that today. So I'm just curious. I mean, I mostly think about setting it statically. But if you want to be able to react to things, it's worth thinking about whether you have the info to do that.
No, I agree. It would be mostly static. I think there are use cases where you can basically know historically that you have thermal throttled on the device in previous calls, say, and then know that and try to remember that for the future. That's sort of one way of doing it, but reacting in real time might be difficult. I guess you could monitor the encode times in GetStats and try to adapt, but yeah.
I think it's my turn. I would echo Bernard's thoughts about how would one web application actually be able to use that that flag. I don't think I don't think we will get the information for web pages to know whether there is thermal throttling or very high CPU usage and so on. So I'd like to understand how much web applications can help the user agent make the right choice here. User agents has the information, but web page does not have it. And I guess it would be a hint. But my question would be how a user agent would be able to use that hint properly. Because it might depend on battery life or plenty of things. So I'm not really clear. And then how do we get interrupt as well? That's the second thing there.
So this is going to have to be a best effort thing. You're not going to be guaranteed that this is going to kick in. And my thinking has been that if the user agent knows that you are thermal throttled, it can sort of ignore the request to do high complexity. So it's sort of, but this is allowed to set your preferred upper bound, basically. So yes, there are heuristics that apps can use for sure to figure out as well what the CPU situation is like. I've talked to people who are sort of saying we're not going to deploy this web app on you unless we have control over your device and know the performance and the network it has. So there are those cases as well with that, where they don't really have to know. As for interop, I mean, it doesn't really affect the output in any way. It's always going to be a valid decodable stream, and there's always going to be variability based on bitrate or not, and I don't think this is really different.
So it's more of like a flag. I prefer energy versus bitrate.
Yes.
But at the same time, depending on the Ethernet, if you're using Ethernet or radio, then you might trade one energy to another. So it's very difficult. And I'm still not yet sure how the web application can help with agent here. So yeah, if you can comment, there's probably a GitHub, there's a GitHub issue. So I'll read it. I guess there are already like descriptions on how that could work and what are the heuristics that web page can use and so on. Maybe that would help.
Yeah, good point. We'll continue on the GitHub issue.
Henrik.
Yeah, I wanted to add, so in with content hint solves the problem that, if you are screen sharing with fine-grained text, you want the encoder to optimize for that in a different way than if you have a camera with large moving objects or whatever. I don't view this API any different. Like detecting thermal throttle, I think that's just one example, but I think different applications have different needs, and just like the app might know the content hint that is appropriate, it might know if it's important to optimize encoder quality or something else. And if this is phrased similar to a content hint, then I think it's a good idea.
Tim.
Yeah, I could see a use for this, and in fact, even for Opus Audio. Like if you want to send a large number of Opus streams that have been differently mixed in Web Audio, you can definitely rack up some CPU use there. So I think it's worth being able. If you could say, well, I know that if I've got 10 listeners on this, more than 10 listeners on this, then I won't dial down the complexity. Or if I've only got 4, then I'll dial it up. I could see myself using that.
Yeah. So this is actually for getting the information about whether or not you have been thermal throttled in the past. This is actually a place where the compute pressure API might be useful. As long as you can identify that this is the same device that we have history on, we can tell that last time we tried this, we went into critical thermal state. And then dial back. So that's only one of the ways in which information can be made available. But there's at least one way that you can do it using only proposed WGC interfaces.
Yeah, as I said, I'm hoping there are other ways to use this API than compute pressure, because if there's only compute pressure, that's not enough for me.
Yeah. I mean, there are other secret ways, other way or not non-standardized ways currently, and there will be more in the future.
So heuristic, it's fine. Yeah.
Let's move on to the next presentations. We're 2 minutes past. Samir.
Yes, hi, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's a continuation of the API proposal for ICE checks, but I've narrowed the proposal down to just one capability for now. So that is the ability to monitor ICE checks and have the app initiate them as well. Just to recap, since we've been talking about this for a couple of times, consent checks are normally sent every 4 to 6 seconds, but this proposal would let apps send ICE checks on demand, as well as observe the ICE checks that the ICE agent is sending out on its own. And the point of this is to let the app collect information, basically RTT, about the ICE checks on different candidate pairs, so that the app can make a good decision about switching transport to a different candidate pair. So next slide, I'll jump straight into the proposal. There's basically 2 entry points for it. There's a method on RTC ICE transport that lets the app send an ICE check on a candidate pair. And there's an event that fires when the ICE agent wants to send out an ICE check. And there's a plain vanilla event. There's nothing special about this. The app cannot cancel this in this current proposal. Both of these resolve into an ice check request. The promise is resolved when the ice check is actually sent, and then the request contains another promise which resolves when a response is received. And in either case, if there's a failure to send the ice check or a failure to receive a response, there's an error that gets thrown and the promise gets rejected. So that's a proposal we've seen a couple of times before, so I'll just move on quickly. Next slide, please. So a few caveats. The scope of this API is just stun binding requests, not other stun methods. So this doesn't affect anything with relay, with turn, not stun bindings because they do not generate a response. It does not affect how retransmits get sent. There's just a Boolean in the response which indicates to the app whether there was a retransmit that happened, because in that case, the app cannot use the RTT reliably to figure out if it's one RTT or several possible RTTs. The ice checks that the app can initiate, those are also just stun binding requests. They are rate limited by the user agent, and it is possible to have multiple outstanding checks. You have several pending promises in that case, and yeah. So that's it. That's the gist of the proposal. We can pause here and we can save time for discussions, and then I can continue with the rest of the slides if we have some time left. Harald.
Oh, sorry.
Ah.
That's an old hand.
Okay.
When I'm sitting at home, it takes down my hand automatically, but here I have to pop up the window and take it down. Peter.
Perhaps not surprising. I think this looks good, and I appreciate you paring it down to a proposal that looks very straightforward.
Cool. Thanks.
Sounds like a very short discussion.
Any more takers before I move on? Cool. If there's no other comments, I can move on to the next couple of slides, but I'll take it as an indication that this is ready to move to a PR if there's no other comments or objections. So the usage of the proposal, again, this looks very similar to what we've seen earlier. The app can basically you wait for promises for the ice checks to be sent and then to get a response, and then if you do something with RTT once you get the response, or if there's an error, you do something with the error. There was a point brought up in one of the earlier meetings about whether the API should be on RTCI's transport versus on RTCI's candidate pair, which is also an interface at this point. I don't really have a strong opinion either way, except that on RTCI's transport, it makes it slightly easier to have the specification written in a way that lets us validate if the app is doing something sensible, like actually sending a pair on a valid candidate pair. We can do that with the candidate pair as well. It just makes the specification, I think, slightly more involved. But otherwise, I haven't come up with any good reason why it should be on either RTCI's transport or candidate pair. And then next slide. So this is just ways in which we could potentially extend the API in the future. The first point is what we actually discussed before, which is to allow the app to prevent the ICE agent from sending out a candidate pair. And that's just to make the event cancelable. So we could potentially come back to that at some point in the future. The other more interesting extensions would be to actually let the app observe some stun attributes or actually send some stun attributes on the ice checks as well, or to have different timeouts, things like that. So There's areas to explore this in the future, but for now, I would like to stick with just the proposal to send and receive or send and observe ice checks. So that's all my slides.
Just say thank you.
All right, thank you.
I guess if there are no objections, the next step is to prepare a PR and then continue discussion there. Right?
So, yeah.
We're ahead of time. Wow.
No. So, Peter.
All right. Next slide.
We lost
Um,
the chair, so you're the sole chair now, Gideon.
So this is basically a status update on RTP transport. There's nothing like deep to discuss here, but a reminder about the use cases we're trying to solve with RTP transport. Here's a list. I'm not going to read them all out loud. You can look at them for a minute. Talked about a lot of them before. Okay, next slide. Here are some very specific examples about things that people are interested in doing. While you're looking at this list, which I'm not going to read all out loud, I will point out that there was a nice breakout room discussion at TPAC, and so some of these were discussed in depth there. Next slide. This is just a reminder, by the way, we've talked about this before. So now the real status update is that we've made progress in the sense that we have a repository for the RTP transport spec. It's broken up into 2 different explainers at the moment, and then a combined API outline for those. Actually, but after the slide was made, there was an actual spec document added, index.bs. So there's that too. And then in Chromium, there's an intent to prototype, and there's an example of the second use case explainer for doing custom bandwidth estimation. And if you run Chrome in the right way with the right flag or thing turned on, I haven't done it myself, so, but you can run that example if you want. Next slide. So some of the things that we've made progress on and figured out are things like how to do transferability in workers, although we are getting the fine details on that API still figured out. How to process lots of packets with an optional batch processing mechanism, although we are getting the fine details on how to avoid garbage collection there. And then also how to do custom bandwidth estimation, pacing, and probing with a mechanism where there's a relationship between the browser and the JavaScript, giving information to the JavaScript, allowing the JavaScript to calculate things and then provide a value back. And also we're figuring out fine details of that. And then finally, bring your own buffer, again, trying to avoid garbage collection. So next slide. Things that are still in progress, other than the fine details of the ones I just mentioned, are we want to allow for custom NAC and RTX. We're still trying to figure out if that's like on a per transport level or a per sender level. And simulcast, although we made some good progress this morning on deciding that we'll be using per mid objects here. So that one maybe is more in the made progress bucket than the in progress, or should have been on the last slide. We made progress since I made these slides. And lastly, we're trying to figure out how we can have an RTP transport that doesn't require as much SDP and to set up and as many STP bumper lanes. I've been working on that. We'll probably add an explainer for that, but it's still in progress. Next slide. Okay, so the big conclusion is that we're making good progress. There's still a lot to do, but it's heading along. And so I'll continue to make status updates here. Probably the most interesting thing that happened at TPAC was that there were a lot of, the question at the breakout session was asked if we should make a community group specific to RTP transport, and there were several people that mentioned that they would join a community group that are people that do not regularly join a working group. So that's something that happened at the breakout session. That's it for my status update. I don't know if there's anything to discuss really.
Jennifer is back. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Hi there. Sorry, I dropped earlier, and sorry for the imposition there. I see someone managed to. Thanks, Henrik, for taking over the slides. Just a difficulty on our end here. Thank you for the update. Yeah, I think I didn't speak up at TPAC, but I think I would also. I believe Colin suggested he would join a working group as well as a community, rather than a community group, and I do believe that working group. I think this is a good API to build on, and I think I welcome feedback, and I think it would be good to keep it in the working group. That's my feedback. I was wondering whether you talked about, if I missed the beginning, please correct me. I'm wondering how this deals with congestion control. And so one of the ideas we were wondering about was whether it would make sense to explore RTP transport under the existing WebRTC congestion controller, if you had thought about that. Because I do think it's promising. If we could, at some level, if we could polyfill RTP sender and RTP receiver on top of RTP transport, I think that's something we could get behind.
Wow, polyfilling. Well, there's a lot that goes into the RTP sender and RTP receiver. So some of that is already provided by RTP transport, the transport side, and some of that's provided by web codecs, the encode and decode side. But then, as you mentioned, you have the congestion control, but that's not really a part of polyfilling an RTP sender because there's no way to do custom congestion control with an RTP sender right now. So it's kind of orthogonal. But if you're talking about polyfilling an RTP receiver, the missing piece that is in either web codecs or RTP transport is the jitter buffer. So we don't currently have any like jitter buffer object. But if you want to explore the possibility of doing a polyfill of a sender receiver, I think that would be an interesting thing to explore.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean necessarily that the browsers would do this polyfilling, but that an API basically could achieve feature parity with RTP sender and receiver with RTP transport, and using and that JavaScript would then handle things like jitter buffer and stuff like that. But I'm more interested in whether I think a lot of the feedback at TPAC was concerns over the unlimited bandwidth congestion controller circuit breaker design.
Okay, I'll try to answer both your things. First, on the can JavaScript basically implement an RTP sender or receiver using the RTP transport plus web codecs? I think the answer is yes. The only caveat is that right now you still need to do all the same SDP dance, which is why I want to explore requiring less SDP, something to just set up the transport rather than right now where you have to set up all the M lines for senders and receivers. On the congestion control front, yes, trying to determine the line between how much JavaScript has in control versus the browser is still something that is one of those fine details we need to figure out. I don't think we've exactly nailed that yet, but
that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think I'm done.
Nope, I guess
Still ahead of time? Yes.
Yes. So, Elad, it's your turn.
That's what, 20 minutes ahead of time? Yeah, I was not ready. Okay, so thank you very much. I would like to talk about set zoom level and captured surface control in general. Next slide, please. By the way, could you go full screen?
Yes.
Slideshow.
Thank you very much. So just a quick reminder, we've got an API called Captured Surface Control. And with Captured Surface Control, you can do two general things. You can control and read and write zoom and read and write scroll events. Today, we're only going to talk about Zoom and only about TriedEdit because we've mostly had agreement about all sorts of things in previous meetings. Some agreements we've had is that this is a use case that needs to be solved. We've agreed about the general approach. There were some concerns about remote users, but we've set out to fix all of these concerns. We agreed, for example, that the capture wheel was the right way to address these concerns for scroll. So today I want to talk a little bit more about how to do the same thing for Zoom. Next slide, please. So some desired properties for set Zoom level would be that first, it should only be callable in response to the user's direct interaction. So basically, it cannot just, the web application should not be able to just, decide that it's scrolling itself. And there is no consensus that transient activation would be sufficient. I personally think yes, but the working group would like to have tighter guarantees, and I am happy to try and humor everybody. Next slide, please. So the general idea would be something along those lines. First thing that you do is you validate, you say, if this algorithm is executing from the context of an event handler, which is handling an event age, and E, and E is trusted, proceed. But we need a way to say that in spec language, right? Let's just stop for a second. So again, what we're trying to find out here is that we're not just calling set Zoom level whenever, but rather we're calling it as we're handling an event that was fired by the user agent in response to the user interacting directly with the application. Next slide, please. So my first stab at this was a little bit clunky. I'm ashamed to bring it up, that I brought it up, and I'm a little bit embarrassed for you guys for not saying anything about it. Basically, what I said was, let's create some kind of handler, and the handler would fire multiple different tasks, and they would open a window of opportunity, and then you get to call set Zoom level, and then it closes the window of opportunity, and it was all a bit much, so sorry about that. Next slide, please. Let's explore three different simpler approaches today. First of all, if we look at the previous thing, we realized that we kind of introduced a second handler, but we basically just, typical usage is going to be from inside of a handler anyway, right? You click a button, the button says zoom in, and then you're handling that. So we don't need yet another handler. So all we need to do is actually just work harder to make sure that set Zoom level is running in the right context. Next slide, please. Thank you, Yanivar, by the way. Yes, that is the issue. So approach number one is we could use this informal language. We could try to make it as formal and as accurate and precise as we can, but generally say like, hey, that's what we're trying to get. Make sure that you're running from inside of the correct context. Approach number two, thank you so much, Eric. Just a second. So approach number two is that we can look at window.event. It is marked legacy, but I don't think that that marking is actually problematic for our use case. And in that case, the spec would say something along the lines of first, look at window.event. If it happens to be undefined, that means you're not running from the context of any event handler actually, so reject. Otherwise, check if that event that you're handling right now is trusted, and so on and so forth. Spoiler alert, I think we should go with this approach, but here's just one more approach, number three. If we were to worry about the legacy aspects of the previous suggestion, we could instead employ the following workaround that a colleague has suggested to me. And that is, what if we make sure that set Zoom level itself accepts an event, and then it is up to the application to take the event that it is handling and use it actually as some kind of permission token. So basically it feeds it into set Zoom level, and then set Zoom level checks that it checks the dispatch flag, which basically corresponds to, is this the event being handled right now? Okay, because the dispatch flag is only set while that event is being handled. And if you cache it for later, it changes, okay? And then you check the is trusted. Next slide, please. So, yeah, what do you guys think? I saw Yanivar put his hand up first.
Oh, am I first? Okay. Yeah. So, at first, I would like to, if you could clarify what was wrong with what you put the TPAC, because I think that was basically approach that a lot of us found appealing. And you pass in an element, and that was similar to what we do with capture wheels. So I think that was the broad agreement that that was the way to go. The problems with passing in an event, excuse me, is that I'm not sure we can tighten that enough to where it's meaningful mitigation to remote control. For instance, on the issue I mentioned mouse move events, and you said this would work with mouse move events, and I don't think calling this API from a mouse move event is a significant mitigation to remote control.
I'm sorry, I think you're conflating two different issues. Henrik, if you go to the next slide. So here you basically raise this question, and I'm ready to answer it by saying, hey, let's make sure that we only handle specific events that we know to be good and extend that later or never. But that's a good starting set. But that's a completely different question as far as I'm concerned. Previous slide, please. So right now we're asking about what the shape needs to be. Henrik, could you go back all the way? Like, could you keep going back until I ask you to stop? One more. Yes, thank you. Here. So that was the what we suggested during TPAC, and basically we see that we create a handler, and then we give it to, we call controller.set zoom level handler. That's the bottom line over there. And then we say, for this element and that event, and that's kind of clunky, right? Like that's not idiomatic at all. That would be the first time this is done on the web platform, as far as I know. So basically the approaches I'm offering today give you the exact same guarantees, only in a more idiomatic form. And also they're a bit less verbose for the web developer. Henrik, just FYI, whenever you move the slides, like you move it for everybody, could you go to the next one? And one, yeah, sorry. Next one again. Yeah, okay, I guess I don't have it. But basically the code would be a lot simpler, right? You would just say button dot add event listener click, and the way you normally would. You would have a completely run-of-the-mill kind of handler, and you would call set zoom level as though it were any other function, and that would work. And if you ever try to do it outside of a handler, it would just give you an error.
So, yeah, I don't think, this is just my opinion, I don't think we need to bike shed the API. I think it's a premature thing to bike shed the API surface right now. If we can't, I think we first need to agree on the security properties that we're seeking, which is to limit remote control access. And I noticed even in the TPAC slide, there were some differences. You can pass in an element, but we don't say that much about, there was some back and forth about, what type of elements. And it said we wouldn't want to limit it to like click up and click down buttons, but maybe we do. Maybe we want to start conservative here. So, but
okay.
Anyways, sorry, you on the queue.
Okay. Just to say that I think it's just the time to bike shed, because I am hoping to already ship this API soon. I thought that we were in rough agreement and not much was left. But yes, UN?
Yes, thanks. So as I said at TPAC, it would be interesting to look at surfaces like iPads, where you can do pinch and somehow you do both scrolling and zooming at the same time. So, and also I said that one of the things that could be interesting is that the zoom commands that you put on a tab, you just ask them to be forwarded to the captured tabs as well, which would be very similar between capture wheel. Like it would be the same model for zoom as we have for capture wheel. And one thing that I was thinking is that maybe when you ask for sending the wheel commands to the capture, to the captured application, you might also want to do the same things for the zoom commands, or when you're pinching with touch screens, the same things will apply, and it would be both wheel events and zoom events that would go to the captured application, and that would maybe make set zoom level like a P2 something that we could work on later on, because somehow by forwarding these things, you're already with just one API allowing to solve both the usual case of sending wheel and sending zoom commands just at once. And it would be a single API just for forwarding and not setting zoom levels that we would keep like in the future, because it seems like a more difficult issue than for capture wheel.
So I'm sorry, Yuan, but you said several things, and it's going to be difficult for me to respond to all of them because you didn't give me time to respond, and now I'm afraid I might not remember all of them. First of all, iPads are not the only machines out there, so even if there is some special treatment that we could do with iPads, that does not mean that the problem is solved. Not everybody has a touch screen, and definitely on some web applications, you just want to be interacting with the mouse and clicking stuff, right? And I don't think that I think that we should handle those cases too. So I didn't really understand in what other way you wanted to combine these two very different use cases. One of them user scrolling, one of them user changing zoom.
So the iPad is just an example.
Okay.
Like phones, it's the same. Well, what I'm saying is that currently the API is a capture wheel, and maybe we could make it more abstract, so that the principle would be that when the user wants to scroll or want to select a particular region that it wants to be displayed, it's this principle that we want to ingrain into that API. And if that's what we want to solve there, then it's partially solving the zoom level issue that you have, because it would already be part of it. And the principle would be just to forward these commands from the capturing to the captured tab. And I think that that way, ideally, we would design APIs so that they would work in all devices, whether a screen is touchable or not. And hopefully we can do that here as well. Because currently it's really not the case. Like capture wheel, for instance, you need a mouse, and
no,
I feel like we could do better.
I don't. So first of all, I don't understand why this is coming so late. Second, it is working with my trackpad.
I said that at TPAC as well.
Okay, this is working with trackpad as well. So I don't really agree that this only works with the mouse, and I don't suspect that the touchscreen and the trackpad are significantly different.
Agreed.
Okay, so and you are very welcome to interact with the demo and see that it works flawlessly with the trackpad. And I don't think that we've got an API that solves the problems that we have at hand. It provides the security properties that we wanted. And I don't see a reason to go back to the drawing board at this stage. Yes, Yanivar?
Well, I think you and myself have given you feedback both at TPAC and today about the direction we thought would work. And it doesn't seem like that has been incorporated in this proposal.
The minutes from TPAC show a very different mood about the shape of the API.
I don't think that is accurate. Well, the same. So if you would ship something, what would you ship? Well, you presented at TPAC, or the thing that was in the issue yesterday?
So my plan was to ship capture wheel as is, because the mood was good about that, and nobody came up with any new concerns. UN wanted to be able to delegate that to the user agent too, and we agreed that the current API shape allows that to browsers that wish to do that. That's number one. And for set zoom level, I could ship what we agreed on in TPAC, but I'm coming up with what I believe to be a better suggestion, and I suggest that we just pivot here.
And that's not a lot of time for us to respond to, right? So
sorry,
that's not a lot of time for us to respond.
It's been 6 months at least, I think.
Since
We can check when the.
I'm saying TPAC was a month ago, right? And then you're not shipping that. You're shipping what you proposed on the issue. It sounds like yesterday.
I'm not shipping that yet. I've not made any changes. I'm suggesting them right now for you. Now,
I asked you, what are you planning to ship?
This is open for discussion. I've come here today with a proposal, and instead we're now talking about going back to the drawing board, and I don't really understand why. I'm proposing a very small change.
I don't think anyone's talking about going back to the drawing board. I think you mentioned it, but the point here is to, for instance, the name Capture Wheel. I think there was feedback that that might be very specific, too specific for what we might want it to have covered. It might not just be wheel, it might be other things. Yeah, that was feedback at TPAC, I believe.
Yeah, and I believe I gave you carte blanche to choose the name.
Yeah, if I may, if you're planning, like you're talking about shipping, and if the idea is that you're shipping very quickly, I can take an action to look precisely at this API and provide feedback, because I feel like we were designing the thing and we were not really at shipping time, and I would prefer that we have like time so that I file all the issues I have with this spec if we are really at design time, at shipping time.
Definitely, I want to give you the time. So now that we're here and we've got some time, do you see any problems with set zoom level?
Yes, sure. I think that we should concentrate on Capture Wheel, which has the potential to do great things. The name is not good. There might be issues like maybe the web application wants to stop the forwarding or re-enable forwarding. So there are like improvements to the API shape, but we could do to Capture Wheel, and maybe extend its functionality a little bit so that set zoom level is less important, and that's what I'd like to discuss and file issues on GitHub.
I don't understand how set zoom level can be less important, and I apologize that I don't have any slides for Capture Wheel today, because I thought that we were in agreement already, and today I came ready to talk about set zoom level, which is very important to the web developers we've been in touch with, and I am surprised that you say it's not important.
For Capture Wheel, I think we have agreement on the overall design, the principle, but I don't think that we have agreement on the particular API shape, the algorithms, and so on.
I see that Guido filed the request for positions in late August. We're in mid-October by now, so I think you've had 2 months, and I don't believe that you responded to those standards positions.
Sorry, Elad, can I interrupt you? I think we need to follow, we have some rules of engagement here that I think it's just getting a little heated. So let's focus on the topic.
Yeah, as I said, I'm happy to provide feedback through GitHub and take an action item to do that in a timely manner, like 1 or 2 weeks.
That would be very welcome. Thank you so much. Can we talk about set zoom level today?
So which version is this?
Sorry?
Which version?
Well, that's the question. So basically, we've got the, Henry, could you go back approximately 4 slides? One more? Thank you. That's what we spoke about during TPAC. Are you saying that you like this? Because we could keep that.
So if the question is for me, I think I like the improvement over earlier iterations that we now passing in an element. It's still, and I think that was the right direction. So I like this direction. It's still what percent is mostly click buttons, and so the idea in our mind was that you would click a button, and then that affects the web application would get called back, and it would be able to set a zoom level from that. That seems like a decent mitigation for remote control to me, that the user has to click a button, and it's only during that click that you can set the zoom level. However, if we expand that to other types of events like mouse moves,
I'm sorry, I think you misunderstood.
Hold on.
Then I think you misunderstood, because here it was already for more than click. Like if you look at this, look for the word selector, top line, first line, right? add set zoom handler receives an element, a selector, and the handler, and the selector is basically on click, on change, on mouse move. Now, if you want to outscope certain events, that's possible with all of the proposals currently on the table. So if you want to have only allow listed events, then every single one of the proposals I am now allowing you to choose for, asking you to choose from, all of them support that.
So I would like to finish my point though, which is that what I'm looking at here is an example, right? So I think for this to be, from this example, I might infer many things. One is that on-click is one of the possible options that we can pass in. So I like this direction. I think we still need to talk about what type of elements are supported, scrollers, sliders. The details matter here if we want to have mitigations against remote control.
But
so that needs to be worked out.
The remote control is fully mitigated by every one of these options, and I'm willing, if you want to dissect one of them and make sure that it's still completely outscoped, I'm happy to do that. So is there one that raises your concerns?
Well, on the GitHub discussion yesterday, I asked if this would work for mouse wheel, and you said yes, and that's concerning. So
no, sorry,
I think we need
yes,
more time to look at this.
No, I said yes, but I'm happy to outscope that. And then, Henry, could you go to 51, please? A few more. You're at 47. Yeah. 52. Sorry. Yes, 51. So if we look at the bottom here, so I said, yes, it is possible right now. I do not think it's a problem, but in the interest of starting out conservatively, I propose that we have the following spec language. Permitted event types are click, input, and change. And if the event is not of that type, we reject. So
that would be good. But you also intimated that you thought the TPAC proposal also had this limitation
absolutely,
that it would allow mouse moves. And that was concerning because that makes me not sure we had consensus or we had agreement on general approach. No, but I agree, if we can limit this. I'm also, do you know of any other web API that uses this technique? Because I'm a bit concerned whether this could actually work. But yes, I agree with the general premise that we should try to limit what kind of elements we want to involve with here. And it's still not clear to me whether only relying on the event dispatch flag and event is trusted is sufficient compared to the approach of passing in an element might have some advantages. For instance, it might address what UN suggested more directly, which was to have the clicks more directly go there from the user agent.
I think
might
that
imply a slightly different design, which I would love to hear.
Okay, so first of all, you said mouse move was possible, and when I said yes, I in the same message, right? I said that here is the mitigations. The same, all of the approaches, both the TPAC one as well as the new ones, all suffer of the same mouse move movement, and all of them can be addressed by the same mitigation, which I've already agreed to. Okay, and if you ever want to also limit not just the type of event, but also the type of element, all of these approaches can do that too, because in the case of the TPAC one, you were explicitly passing in the element, and with the new approaches, the event target is the element. So you can have spec language saying, oh, but if the element is of this type or that type, reject. So I don't think that there is a difference here.
Well, I think I would like some more time to look at the latest proposal.
Sure. Definitely, if we want to look at more things and make sure that the properties that we were seeking are attained, that's great. What I'm hearing today, and that surprises me and upsets me a bit, is that you guys seem to think that we've not made any agreements and that we should go back to the drawing board. And if I misunderstood that, I would love to hear that, because that would be very reassuring.
Well, I don't think anyone's talked about a drawing board, but I think we've said at TPAC that there was general agreement of the direction, right? So
Okay, so
reviewing the API would be part of determining whether we think the API is sufficient, and if it's not sufficient, hopefully propose changes to the API to mitigate the things that we consider not sufficient, right? All right.
I think
Speaking as a bystander, I'm hearing that we have consensus that capture wheel is in a shape that we can ship it and just get it out of the way. We have consensus that we can't let set zoom level have remote control, but I would suggest that we should start with one of the APIs suggested here and say that if it's possible to prove that our security concerns are not mitigated, that is a reasonable objection. But that unless we find such a situation, we should go forward with one of the approaches suggested here. And the differences are mostly cosmetic.
Well,
so can we agree that objections to this API need to be couched in the language of the following security concerns are not mitigated?
So, as co-chair, I'm not hearing general agreement here. I think there's been a request to have a couple of weeks to review.
I mean, this. I'm speaking as a bystander now. It's up to the chairs to actually work on this.
I guess I mean, we can say that the next step is to choose one of these surfaces which are largely equivalent in terms of their properties, and send it as a spec PR for review, so that and then look at it and discuss the properties and determine if the objective of ensuring that this only works for the intended use case, which is the local user zooming intending to zoom the page, is satisfied, and that the cases that we want to prevent are properly prevented. So,
as I said at TPAC, I said that maybe it's fine in terms of security, this principle, but we should also evaluate the possibility to do the direct forwarding, like reuse the capture wheel model for the zoom level. And I provided that feedback at TPAC, and so that's why I think that we should do that. I'll take some time to during the coming weeks to actually read the spec precisely, provide feedback, file issues, and so on.
Yeah, but I think the issue here is that there are two use cases. So that one is when you have the ability to forward because the user can interact directly, like with a touch screen. But the set zoom level is for the case when you interact with an application provided UI to do the zoom level, for the common use case when you have a screen that doesn't have that is not touch screen. So yeah, we can incorporate automatic forwarding.
I understand that part of the forwarding can already affect the zooming experience of the user. So that's why they're sort of related. And that's why I want to dig further precisely on how capture wheel can solve part of the zoom problem. And then we can figure out precisely what's remaining for the set zoom level issue. And so that's why I was thinking that maybe we could work with higher priority on capture wheel than the zoom level. If now you're saying that you need both to ship at the same time, then that's a discussion that we can have as well.
Nobody said that they have to ship at the same time. I don't really, and definitely if you guys want a little bit more time, that's possible. I just want to mention that I'm in the exactly in the middle of making some significant changes to the spec. So please don't look at it until the end of tomorrow, end of day tomorrow. I'll send you an email if you want. I want to point out another thing, and that is that when you interact for zoom in and zoom out, right? Like that could be a variety of elements, and basically, and the variety of events. And even if pinching is one of them, that's only possible on some devices. So if there's some edge cases that we're not currently handling, it's always possible to handle that in the future. To me, pinch is different than setting a specific value for zoom, which is what is currently being requested by web developers, and that is the problem we're trying to solve.
But it seems a reasonable point that on devices that do have pinch, the application needs to think about, or the browser needs to think about how these features are going to interact.
Definitely,
like a set level, and then pinches. Does that trash the set zoom level, or how do they interact?
Definitely, and if we can make sure that there is a good solution that works for everything, great. But if there is no one solution that fits everything, it's not that we now need to fit ourselves to the pinch case. That's the edge case as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. Any other comments on this?
Yes. So maybe we could take this time and look of the three options. So we've got the one option that we had in TPAC. Okay, you're going to evaluate that. Now, of the three options shown today, okay, which one is preferable?
I guess for the purpose of sending a spec for review.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I think that's part of the review. I think I'm still not sure that the dispatch flag. There's no other web API that uses this for these guarantees. Is that right?
Not that I'm aware of. Now, the dispatch flag is basically corresponds to the event phase.
Yeah. Right, but it's an internal flag mostly used by the event system itself to keep track of when event handlers are running.
That's not my preferred approach, by the way. Like if we go one slide back, thank you. We will see that there is a way of saying, like, are you currently running, like, window.event is undefined when you're not processing an event, and it is that event that you're processing when you are. So you could always just look at window.event and check if that is defined, and then if it is defined, you can look at is trusted, etc., giving us all of the properties that we were looking for.
So I don't think I have all the information to pick right now, but I do feel like this is new information as of yesterday, and I think passing in the element still felt closer to the capture wheel solution. So, and if it ends up being identical, that's
We have feedback from web developers that it's unwieldy, and if it does not, so if it's more ergonomic to use the approach number 2, and it provides the same security properties, to my mind, the choice is clear. It needs to be number 2. Now, I'm willing to have, it's like if you feel very strongly, and that's what is gonna, allow us to have consensus. I'll go with what we agreed on TPAC, but I would encourage you to look at number 2 because I think it's the exact same properties.
Yeah, I think we'd have to review those properties.
It seems you're trying to do the synchronous asynchronous transient activation thing, and maybe that's a primitive that should be defined somewhere, like there is transient activation and there is and so on. And if that's the principle you're trying to design around, then maybe we should find an issue on the HTML spec, and then you would say, hey, I really want that in the spec, and I filed an issue somewhere, and we will fix exactly how it's being implemented. But I don't think that this working group is like, I don't think in the room they are like the best experts in that area, like real HTML infra people. So, but the principle you're trying to convey in the spec is actually pretty clear. So I would go with wording and a reference to a GitHub issue somewhere on the HTML spec, maybe, or something like that.
So you're saying you prefer number one?
No,
Did I get that right?
no, not really. I'm saying, well, if that's the most precise you can get right now, yes. But I would say, okay, we actually want something more than transient activation, and the HTML spec is not defining it. So it would be great if the HTML spec is defining it. So I would add a note. We filed an issue. Here is the issue where we actually want this primitive, and have somebody defining this primitive precisely. And this would be the HTML experts.
So that's something that definitely we can fix later. Like that would not prevent us from shipping, like not having the exact words. But yes, I am looking for something more stronger than transient activation because you guys have asked for it. And I think that is trusted is exactly it. Like the fact that it's a trusted event being handled right now. And I think it's a technical bureaucratic issue to make sure that it's conveyed in proper spec language. And definitely we can improve that over time, but I think number one and number two already solve that to a large degree.
I'm always hesitant to add this kind of wording that seems super strong, and in fact we discover later on. So that's why I think the principle of describing to the best of what we want the behavior and then piggybacking on somebody to fix that issue as a follow-up is okay.
Okay, just a second. So do I understand that you're saying if we keep set zoom level with the current API shape, so it takes one number, which is the zoom level, you would be okay with that so long as we find some way of saying it has to be in immediate, direct response to the user's actions. Did I get that right?
So you ask a question, which options there you prefer, and it's really like how do I write the spec, right? And yeah, my answer would be that I would write a note stating that it's not transient activation that we would like. It's really a synchronous kind of activation, and we would add within the spec an issue to the GitHub HTML repo. Like we would file an issue on the HTML spec, and we would refer in that spec from now and be done with it. Because if we have algorithms like that, maybe somebody will implement exactly like that, and there will be a hole, or maybe the spec will change on the other app, and we will have a hole as well, or somebody will copy that in another spec thinking it's fine and it's not, and so on. So it's better to just acknowledge that we're trying to go there, but we don't have like the principle being defined in the HTML spec yet.
Okay, I understand. So you're answering with the strict confines of what you prefer between 1, 2, and 3. You're not telling me that you are actually accepting set zoom level as it is.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
There was a question that was asked by Guido about how do I write the spec in the best way I can right now, and that's I'm trying to help answering this question.
Okay. I see Harold is on the queue.
No, I'm not.
Okay, Guido.
Need to take myself.
Yeah, just wanted to point out that just because I mean, in one of the proposals, a comment was mentioned that there's no precedent of a spec using one of the properties. I mean that I wouldn't say that that's a blocker for shipping. Because, for example, we have the precedent of encoded transform, which is an API that fires an event in a worker as a side effect of calling another constructor on the window, and that was also never done on the web platform, and we did it anyway, even without precedent for that. So I just wanted to clarify that just because something that is possible but that hasn't been done shouldn't be a blocker if it's indeed a good solution.
Yeah, Jennifer, just before you, I want to know, I thought that we were basically done and that we could ship, and now I'm hearing that this is not the case. So I want some kind of timeline from you guys. Like, are you able to tell me what, how long it would take you to come back with feedback?
Was that for you or for me?
Both.
Well, I think we already asked for a couple of weeks to review.
So 2 weeks?
That UN appears frozen, so I'm not sure you heard that.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I said
Okay.
a couple of weeks. Yeah. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think Guido's right about precedents, but it always helps if there is a precedent, and it turns like that might speed things along. It's better. I think also I heard that we're not all experts on DOM here, so I also need to talk to our DOM folks to make sure if they think this is the right way to go about it. But I think also I would like to understand if we have general agreement of, rather than picking between APIs, it sounds like do we have agreement on what they have in common, which is that seems to be that if we can implement a synchronous activation rather than a transient activation, that we would be okay with an API where the JavaScript can set any zoom level, which could come from a remote control, but only at the time that the user agent clicks a button. And I would also like some clarification on, there was some pushback in the TPAC slides on clicking a button. So can we be more specific about what other user interactions with an element are we talking about?
So here,
like keyboard.
So here I'm trying to converge with you. Basically, if you could give me a list of an MVP for you, and it happens to overlap with my MVP, then I'm fine with going for that. I don't need it to be every single possible element and every single possible event. Like for me, button and click is like the MVP. I would prefer to have it larger with sliders and on change. Yeah.
Yeah, if we can limit it to click in initial versions, I think that would be preferable.
I would have to double check with web developers, but I suspect it's probably okay for us. I'm not sure what happens if you go with tab, you jump over to the button and then you click, press enter. Is that considered a click?
I meant mouse click. A click on the button.
Assuming we cover both users who use some kind of accessibility or the keyboard or something like that. So enter or anything similar and the mouse click, that's the MVP, and we can expand this later.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on everything that might result in a click event. So, but I'm happy to have a click event be the MVP.
I understand. I'm just saying maybe we could agree that maybe it's click plus whatever else would happen if a keyboard event is delivered that's clearly an enter or a space or whatever it is for that specific button.
Yeah, I don't think anyone wants to get in the way of accessibility. So
okay. So what are we not in agreement about? Because now all of a sudden it again sounds to me like we were both in TPAC, like you asked to review the specifics, which is natural, okay. But like of the approach, like where are we not completely aligned?
Well, the thing is that even if we have general agreement on what is common to these APIs, if you're talking about shipping, then you're talking about shipping a specific surface. So that's going to require a more diligent review. I mean, normally in these meetings, we discuss designs and down the road. But if we're going to discuss an API that is about to ship, we need to have more thorough. I think it's fair to ask for more thorough review time.
Yes, I've just said that it's fair, and I'm happy to wait. My question is of the approach, of the approach, like we said capture wheel, modulo the name you choose, and set zoom level, modulo how exactly we specify that it has to be a synchronous event. Where is the, except for that, is there any daylight between us?
I don't understand the question, daylight.
Is there any gap between us? Are we unaligned? Are we not standing in the same position?
as I said, I would need to think more about set zoom level. I think that so far what I heard at TPAC and what I'm hearing here is that there's consensus to move forward with capture wheel, but for set zoom, uncertainty there, at least on my side.
Okay, so am I hearing that? So Yuan, if I understand correctly, you said capture wheel, you're okay with shipping that? Modulo, he dropped out. Yaniv, are you okay with shipping capture wheel, modulo, whatever objections you might find in the next 2 weeks?
I would like to hear more general agreement, particularly I would like to give you time to look at this. I don't think Firefox right now is planning to ship this, so having the two of you agree on the approach, I think it's very important to us.
Okay, so what are the next steps here? Like, if I want to ship capture wheel,
but I think giving UN and myself 2 weeks to review, maybe.
Yep.
Or is that?
Yeah, sure, of course. But like, do we have it? Okay, so you want those to review not only. I understand that you want to review the specifics. My question is whether we at least agree on the approach. Like, I'm asking, should I expect questions of like, this needs transient activation, this step needs to go before that, or should I expect feedback of the type, hey, I've got a completely different idea, maybe we try that instead?
Sorry, I was dropped. Are you talking about capture wheel or capture wheel
Yes.
and set zoom level?
Right before you left, it sounded like you were saying that capture wheel is nearly there and can almost be shipped. Did I hear you correctly? Modulo,
Yeah.
whatever feedback you give during the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, I would need to talk internally about that, but it clearly seems more mature. Yes. To me.
Okay.
So let's hope. Good. So
I think we're close to the end of the meeting.
this is the end of the meeting, yes. So
Thanks so much.
So I guess yeah, see you in November. And thanks everyone for participating.
Thank you for sharing.